You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 9th of January. Enoch Powell's widow furious over ludicrous slur. Huge opposition mounts against gay marriage in the UK. Lesbian couple torture, murder and rob an old age pensioner. Halal Slaughterhouse in Skegness by the Reverend West. French citizens want a referendum on the gay marriage. German historical bias is shifting from race to religion. Saudi National Society for Human Rights calls for end to dowries. British soldier killed by Muslim wearing an Afghan uniform. Thought for the day, the positive lies of democracy. And finally, one lump pirated by Chinese to make another lump. UK News. Enoch Powell's widow is furious over ludicrous slur that portrays her husband as a Nazi sympathiser. The widow of Enoch Powell has criticised as absolutely ludicrous a novel that portrays her husband as a pro-Nazi sympathiser. Pamela Powell said his depiction in the best-selling book Dominion was an unacceptable distortion of a late Tory MP. The book is a historical what-if which explores what might have happened had Britain sued for peace after Dunkirk in 1940. The work is set in 1952 and Britain is portrayed as a puppet state under the control of the Nazis in Berlin. Author C.J. Sampson included real-life figures in his fictitious pro-Nazi government, including Powell as Secretary of State for India. But his widow said Powell, who died in 1998, had totally opposed Neville Chamberlain's appeasement of Hitler. The idea that he would be in any pro-Nazi government is absolutely ludicrous, she said. When Enoch went to Australia in 1937 as Professor of Greek at Sydney University, he told his first lecture that when Britain went to war he would go straight back to join up, and that is what he did. Historian Andrew Roberts said, Powell was an ardent anti-Nazi from the earliest days, even when other Tories were pro-appeasement. I suspect the author is trying to make some sort of modern-day equivalence between Enoch Powell's views on immigration and fascism, and that is so intellectually debased as to be moronic. EDL leader Lennon jailed for passport offence. Stephen Lennon admits to using a passport in the name of Andrew McMaster to board a Virgin Atlantic flight from Heathrow to New York. The leader of the English Defence League has been jailed for 10 months for using someone else's passport to get into the United States. Lennon, 30, pleaded guilty to possession of a false identity document with improper attention, contrary to the Identity Documents Act 2010 at Southwark Crown Court. Lennon used a passport in the name of Andrew McMaster to board a Virgin Atlantic flight, but was caught out after his fingerprints were taken by customs officials. The court heard that Lennon, who had previously been refused entry to the US, used his friend's passport to travel to the country in September. He used a self-check-in kiosk to board the Virgin Atlantic flight and was allowed through when the document was checked in the bag drop area. But when he arrived at New York's JFK airport, the customs officials who took his fingerprints realised he was not Mr McMaster. Lennon was asked to attend a second interview but left the airport, entering the US illegally. He stayed just one night and travelled back to the UK the following day using his own legitimate passport, which bears the name Paul Harris. A nationalist spokesperson commented, "Although I have no sympathy for Lennon's deceit, just how many thousands of migrants and terrorists enter the UK and the US with forged or stolen passports? Are these people ever caught, let alone prosecuted?" Huge opposition mounts against gay marriage in UK. With the coalition government about to publish their bill to legalise gay marriage in England and Wales, there's been a huge increase in opposition to the measure over the last 2 months. Over 624,000 people have now signed the Coalition for Marriage C4M petition against the redefinition of marriage, which simply reads as follows: I support the legal definition of marriage, which is the voluntary union for life of one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others. I oppose any attempt to redefine it. The petition has overwhelmed that of the Campaign for Equal Marriage C4EM, which has attracted only 64,000 signatures, just over 10% of C4M's total. This underlines the growing suspicion that the push to legalise gay marriage is a concern for a small illiberal elite which does not speak for the majority. The Guardian and Independent support Argentina. The Guardian and independent papers have printed Argentina's poisoned witch President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner's opinion on the ownership of the Falkland Islands for the British public to read. The Argentine leader asked both papers to print an advertisement pointing to David Cameron to have talks over the islands. One reporter commented, "The Guardian and the Independent are Marxist surrendering filth. They have the typical left-wing agenda of liberalist degenerate submissiveness, which is not what the Falkland Islanders or the British people want or need to read." A lesbian couple torture, murder and rob an OAP. A retired bus driver and devoted grandfather has been brutally murdered by two lesbians in one of the most horrific crimes so far this year. Barry Reeve was the victim of civil partners Kelly Louise Barnes and Jodie Barnes. The women had overheard him saying he had a few pounds tucked away, so they systematically tortured him for hours to get his PIN number. They tied him up and turned up the volume on the TV so neighbours couldn't hear his screams. His body was found by his daughter 2 weeks after he was killed, the court heard. The victim had numerous knife wounds to his body and he was slowly allowed to bleed to death over 24 hours while still tied to a chair. Coroner's reports say that Mr Reed, also known as Titch because of his small build, also suffered brain injuries because of the beating. The day after the murder, the couple took a taxi back to his house and emptied the fridge and kitchen of all his food. One World Date reporter commented, "This is the true nature of the liberalist left, evil and violent to those who are not in the same mindset as they are." I now hand you over to the Reverend West for his interesting take on a halal slaughterhouse in Skegness.
Halal Slaughterhouse in Skegness. In Lincolnshire recently, a halal slaughterhouse has been opened in Skegness, in which animals are cruelly taken to have their throats slit unstunned, whilst some hysterical religious words are pronounced over them in Arabic. This is surely an outdated and unnecessary practice, which is not in tune with the standards of humanity expected in a modern and vibrant, nay, civilised society. And I understand that Lincolnshire farmers are quite rightly beginning to boycott this disgusting and depraved practice, which is, surely, in contravention of the spirit, if not the letter, of our laws. It is, furthermore, an example of the growing Islamification of our society. But it is not only these houses of cruelty, these halal slaughterhouses, that we are having to cope with. The Mohammedan population are beginning to impose their halal slaughtered food on our shops and supermarket chains. Their aim is to turn everything into halal, whereas my view is that nothing should be halal in our country in these up-to-date days of animal welfare. Certainly, in the past, we could not give the attention that we now do to these issues. But this is not the past. We are living in modern times, where it is surely not necessary to any more accept these practices. Lincolnshire Coastal Branch are to be congratulated for their timely and forthright stand and activity. But Islam is a growing problem in the whole of Europe. The Muslim population is growing exponentially, whilst ours withers on the vine, due to the undermining of the family and to badly modern opinions that our women should work rather than guide the house and have children, thus condemning many young men to a pointless and despondent life of unemployment. Why should some households have both parents on incomes, whilst others have neither? Where is the equality in that? For too long, we have been turning our women into halal employees rather than good wives and mothers at home. There is an unholy connection, therefore, between halal slaughter and anti-family and anti-motherhood feminism. We surely, therefore, have to be active on both fronts. In nearby Peterborough, the third most numerous name already is either Mohammed or some variant of it. Mohammedan food shops with their halal slaughtered flesh are mushrooming in many towns and hamlets of the Shire, and are being patronised by British families who do not yet see the connection between supporting such food venues and the growing Islamification of their neighbourhoods. And then, when the Mohammedans gain a numerical ascendancy in a given area, then all rights and freedoms for women and everyone else are taken away. The Mohammedans expect to gain control of Britain by their money-earning halal food chains and their step-by-step methods throttling our freedoms and taking over our localities gradually. They are aided and abetted by the foul and pestilent forces of the far left within our mainstream political parties and national media, which love nothing better than to put down our culture and heritage and elevate what they consider to be exotic. Try making a halal spring lamb see it that way, however. It is appalling to have to see lambs having their throats slit and then bleating afterwards as they are hung up to be left to bleed to death. I am sure that we have all seen the video of this recently put up by the British National Party on their website. Yes, it is time to say no to halal, and to make Britain once again a country of animal lovers and of humane, not halal, slaughter.
Thank you, Reverend. I'm sure we all agree with you on that subject. European news. A majority of French citizens, or 69%, want a referendum on the gay marriage bill that is up for congressional debate at the end of the month, according to data released Thursday by the French Institute of Public Opinion, IFOP. The French must be called to decide via referendum on the bill, which will allow same-sex marriages and adoptions by gay couples, according to the IFOP survey of 1,008 people aged between 18 and older, published in Valeurs Actuelles Weekly. Of those in favour of the referendum, 86% are the Union for Popular Movement, UNP voters, 84% are National Front voters, and 55% identified as leftists. Also in favour are 70% of respondents aged under 35 and 69% of those aged 35 and up. German historical bias is shifting from race to religion. A new study warns that Islamophobia in Germany is becoming culturally acceptable as racism moves away from ethnicity towards religious bias against Muslims. It's no longer the Turks but the Muslims, Wilhelm Heitmeyer, head of the Institute for Research of Interdisciplinary Conflict and Violence at the Bielefeld University, told the New Onzerbrucker Zeitung on Monday. Research has led him to be concerned that general xenophobia has given way to a growing rejection of Islam in Germany. His theory is not new. A study from Münster University found that in 2010, 66% of Western Germans and 74% of Eastern Germans had a negative attitude towards Muslims. And a more recent study from the Allensbach Institute suggests that this has not changed over the past 2 years, as only 22% of Germans asked said they agreed with Germany's ex-president Christian Wulff's statement that Islam, like Christianity, was part of Germany. Heitmeyer also found that Islamophobia seemed to exist not only in the far right, but was also present in the more left-leaning and centrist circles. The sentiment was identifiable throughout the country from the highest echelons of society to the lowest. Neo-Nazi expert from Dusseldorf Technical University Alexander Hausler told the newspaper that while discriminating against an entire ethnicity was a taboo, religion-based racism was generally considered to be exercising freedom of opinion. Criticism of Islam or Muslims appear acceptable because it is not seen as classically racist, said Hausler. A World at 8 reporter commented, "Well, all these institutes have set about replacing the communist retraining camps and have their roots in Auschwitz. The mainly indigenous people in any country are entitled to question the cause and result of any large immigrant community, whatever title it is given, whether racist or religious, because that is how all people in the world identify themselves and strangers. We all need to stop being so hard on our own tribes." World News. Saudi National Society for Human Rights calls for end to dowries. The recent marriage of a 90-year-old Saudi man to a 15-year-old girl sparked condemnation from the Saudi National Society for Human Rights, NSHR, and activists on Twitter, local media reported Monday. The groom told Al Hayat Daily that his marriage was legal and correct and that he paid a dowry of $17,500 to marry the girl, who is the daughter of a Yemeni father and a Saudi mother. The man went on to say that on their wedding night the child bride entered the bedroom before him, locking himself in. This made him suspicious about some kind of conspiracy by the girl and her mother, the man reportedly said. Close friends of the bride's family said she was so frightened she locked herself in for 2 days before fleeing back to her parents' home. The groom vowed to sue his in-laws to give him back the girl or return him the expensive dowry he paid. A World at 8 reporter stated, "The unfortunate thing here is that he is right. Her parents virtually sold their daughter, which is common practice in the Third World and indeed was common practice in England and Europe until the late 19th century. They should not have taken money for her, but according to the Quran, he now has paid for her, so he either stays married to her or the parents will have to return the dowry." Stopping dowries will not stop these arranged and dowered marriages. It is in their religion and their culture. Even their so-called prophet Muhammad did it. British soldier killed by Muslim wearing Afghan uniform. A brave British soldier has been killed in a sneaky attack by a cowardly undercover Muslim fanatic. The soldier, who is unnamed at present, was on regular patrol in Helmand province when undercover Taliban terrorist Mohammed Kazim Farouk turned his weapon upon him and other soldiers. The terrorist was killed instantly in return fire. 8 other casualties have been reported to have received medical treatment after the incident. The soldier was from the 28 Engineer Regiment. His family have now been informed. These so-called friendly fire incidents are in increase as there is a push to recruit Afghans into the military to bring forward US and UK troops withdrawing. Thought for the day: the positive lies of democracy. I've come to the conclusion that there is no democracy in the world that actually works under its original auspices. The same goes for communism, fascism and anarchy, well, certainly not comprising of their authors' writings and sayings. Switzerland is the nearest to complete and total democracy. It is admittedly a state governed by money and the love of money, but it also has 2 very important laws. 1, each citizen is expected to defend their country by mandatory military service, and 2, every citizen is allowed to defend their home and their land with firearms. Add 2 additional essential items for a truly democratic country and these are virtually no immigration and staying firmly out of any wars outside Switzerland, alias remaining neutral and not part of the old world order, soon to be the new world order of communist Islamic fascists or global corporate leftists. As my saying goes, one man's democracy is another man's fascism. The 2 largest communist countries, China and North Korea, are anything but communist in name only. By the communist mantra, everyone should benefit from a communist society, but of course they do not. As George Orwell in Animal Farm said, all pigs are equal, but some pigs are more equal than others. In China there are even more social differences now than in the past 1,000 years when the warlords and mandarins ruled large ununified parts of China and during famine thousands perished. You have a section of a so-called Communist Party Chinese equal in money only to the Russian oligarchs. The Chinese will eat anything and will sell anything for money. Their way of life has not changed basically for thousands of years, and neither their true culture. The thoughts of Chairman Mao and the re-educating of already educated people did nothing but shift the balance of power from one peasant to another. And now, although all peasants are equal, many are more equal than many others. China still has its starving millions, only they work now for a pittance, manufacturing second-rate crap for the greedy and ignorant West. North Korea is, as everyone knows, verging on starvation, whilst a very few live the life of O'Reilly on their bones. Where are the so-called faces of Lenin and Marxist policies now? What is true about the Far East is that it will take a policy, turn and twist it, then bring it down with a heavy hand to implement it, and so-called people power does not count at all. But remember, it is all for their own good. Greece was the land of democracy in the ancient world, and stuck to it pretty well, which is why of course they were taken over by the Persians, whose idea of democracy was around the same as nowadays, only not built around a phony religion but a raging capitalistic and fascistic regime. The Roman Empire got it almost right until they went sloppily liberal and hedonistic in the latter days of their empire, when they sought to appease the populace with their version of reality TV and take away food, and allow masses of northern Europeans into their cities. That was one of the first ever reactions to overwhelming immigration ancient style, total collapse of the culture and its people. Europe has been striving to democracy since I can remember, especially since the last World War, when unfortunately the greatest result initially from fascist Germany was a well-ordered, workable and proud Germany, which did not sit well with the rest of the world in general, and of course fell right into the trap of trying to sort out what they thought of as a problem, which went horribly wrong. Even more so when Japan was allowed to open the door for Roosevelt to enter the war he desperately wanted to fight. Democracy didn't come into it, I'm afraid, although money-making and power shifting did. Democracy is what the Syrian rebels are fighting for, isn't it? So they take a liberal Muslim state, which even has an opera house and Christians in the government, as well as an English First Lady for God's sake, and with the dubious help of the UK, the UN and the world media, turn it into yet another Muslim hellhole with fanatics baying at the doors. Do not kid yourselves that democracy has anything to do with this or the other hellholes of Libya or Egypt. Democracy is dead in those countries, never to rear its poor old head again. Islam is the new fascist on the block, along with multi-culturalism and multi-ethnicism. You'd have to be seriously stupid to think even for a moment that these shifts of power and money are for the good of the people. They are, however, for the good of some people. Democracy has become the mantra-like word for all people seeking power and money in that order. In reality, why give power to the people to take it all back, or not to make use of it in the first place? In a truly democratic society, referendums should be the norm. The people should be consulted or representatives as such, and if you think the ethnic Labour and Conservative peers or MPs are in touch with you and I, think again. They have been put in place by their own, for their own, and you really are dim if you think they're not. But democracy in all its glory still shines its light on the uninitiated and the people who really do not want to think at all. The cry, "I don't vote because they're all the same," no doubt refers to the democratic system of voting in this country, whereby despite all the hardships given to get women the vote and youngsters, they still do not vote. The ethnics amongst us, also given the UK vote, do vote, because they know that if we British were truly democratic like Switzerland, they would not be here, let alone given the vote and other powers. So democracy has worked against us, and yet the Brits still rail against fascism, even though they're living lives even more under the yoke than the Third Reich, but of course in a very democratic way, that is, unseen, unheard and unspoken, rather like the Three Wise Monkeys. Communism would not work in the UK, as it is still seen as the poor man's party, and parts of this are still alive and well in the Labour Party under the guise of socialism, which also sounds good, but then relate that to National Socialism and we have what? The Third Reich again. So it would seem an ever-ending circle of duplicity, turning and returning under the stage names of different ideologies, whilst the true enemies of our country slide and slither into cracks we do not dream about and stake their claims. As I said on Monday, listen to 100%, but believe only 25%. There is an ocean of information that will never see the light of day, and much of it relates to putting people and political organisations into nicely marketed little parcels with instructions on how to use or throw away. Think for yourself is my thought for Wednesday, and as this is the day on which my father died in 1945 and never saw the end of the war, he would not recognise England today, but I shall remember. And finally, one lump pirated for another lump. Currently under construction in Beijing, the Zaha Hadid designed development Wangjing Soho is an office and retail complex whose gently curving walls are intended to resemble dancing Chinese fans. Located between central Beijing and Beijing Capital International Airport, it is expected to become another landmark building following its completion in 2014. However, this so-called design has been stolen by the Chinese city of Chongqing, and visitors in the future may be surprised to see the development of the Miquan 22nd century building, said by observers to be a copy of Hadid's Beijing development. According to Der Spiegel, the Chongqing building is being completed at a quicker pace than its Beijing counterpart and may open before the building said to have inspired it. Now, I love architecture, although I favour the straight Roman lines or the Art Deco white space, but apparently Iraqi-born London-based Hadid is best known in the UK for the London 2012 Olympics Aquatic Centre. So as with all things connected to that shambles, I'll rest my case. Her two buildings, looking at a computer project, look like one lump of multicoloured concrete and glass, and the second like a vertically challenged lump of the same. Two Chinese fans do not cut it with me, but as they say in China, a fool and his money are soon parted. Hadid is launching some 11 projects in the country currently. Addressing the Chongqing development, Satoshi Ohashi, Zaha Hadid Architects Project Director for the Wangjing Soho complex, said, "It is possible that the Chongqing pirates got hold of some digital files or renderings of the project. If someone really likes Zaha, we will probably see more of her designs across China." Well, this presenter says hopefully not in the UK. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night. And I'm on the gay marriage. German historical bias is shifting from race to religion. Saudi National Society for Human Rights calls for end to dowries. British soldier killed by Muslim wearing an Afghan uniform. Thought for the day, the positive lies of democracy. And finally, one lump pirated by Chinese to make another lump. UK News. Enoch Powell's widow is furious over ludicrous slur that portrays her husband as a Nazi sympathiser. The widow of Enoch Powell has criticised as absolutely ludicrous a novel that portrays her husband as a pro-Nazi sympathiser. Pamela Powell said his depiction in the best-selling book Dominion, Britain Went to War, he would go straight back to join up, and that is what he did. Historian Andrew Roberts said, Powell was an ardent anti-Nazi from the earliest days, even when other Tories were pro-appeasement. I suspect the author is trying to make some sort of modern-day equivalence between Enoch Powell's views on immigration and fascism, and that is so intellectually debased as to be moronic. EDL leader Lennon jailed for passport offence. Stephen Lennon admits to using a passport in the name of Andrew McMaster to board a Virgin Atlantic flight from Heathrow to New York. The leader of the English Defence League has been jailed for 10 months for using someone else's passport to get into the United States. Lennon, 30, pleaded guilty to possession was an unacceptable distortion of a late Tory MP. The book is a historical what if, which explores what might have happened had Britain sued for peace after Dunkirk in 1940. The work is set in 1952 and Britain is portrayed as a puppet state under the control of the Nazis in Berlin. Author C.J. Sampson included real-life figures in his fictitious pro-Nazi government, including Powell as Secretary of State for India. But his widow said Powell, who died in 1998, had totally opposed Neville Chamberlain's appeasement of Hitler. The idea that he would be in any pro-Nazi government is absolutely ludicrous, she said. When Enoch went to Australia in 1937 as Professor of Greek at Sydney University, he told his first lecture that when of a false identity document with improper attention, contrary to the Identity Documents Act 2010 at Southwark Crown Court, Lennon used a passport in the name of Andrew McMaster to board a Virgin Atlantic flight, but was caught out after his fingerprints were taken by customs officials. The court heard that Lennon, who had previously been refused entry to the US, used his friend's passport to travel to the country in September. He used a self-check-in kiosk to board the Virgin Atlantic flight and was allowed through when the document was checked in the bag drop area. But when he arrived at New York's JFK airport, the customs officials who took his fingerprints realised he was not Mr McMaster. Lennon was asked to attend a second interview but left the airport, entering the US illegally.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 9th of January. Enoch Powell's widow furious over ludicrous slur. Huge opposition mounts against gay marriage in the UK. Lesbian couple torture, murder and rob an old age pensioner. Halal Slaughterhouse in Skegness by the Reverend West. French citizens want a referendum